All right, we're back with another discussion about Ile Chiaro's poem, The Aliveness. We started off just kind of hearing a little bit about the expansive nature of the divine, transcendent, and that which can have no adjectives or all adjectives, depending on what your perspective wants to be. And the need for moving out of the mind and for alleviating our definition of self through the senses and from the outside world, but to define ourselves from inside out. And I'm going to read two more stanzas tonight and look at them, and then we've got one more tomorrow that we'll cover. This is really quite unusual, what we're going to read tonight, and it'll be interesting to see what your thoughts are. I think it's fairly controversial from a lot of perspectives, and certainly it runs directly in paradox or at right angles with what we normally think about ourselves. So he says, this aliveness, this divine presence, this God, this isness of being, existent within us, appears only in one circumstance: when we do not want it, when we do not imagine it, when we do not call for it, when the psychological past recorded in the mind completely vanishes. Now, that's staggering. That's staggering because you have to remember your first watch inside as you hear that. See how the mind rebels against that. See how deeply identified we are with our thoughts and our thinking and our memories and our stories and our just our past in general, and how the mind and ego immediately begin attacking the idea and coming up with things like, what, you'll give up thinking? What is that about? You'll be an idiot, because there's no understanding of the real nature that lies behind this mask of ego, the real nature that would allow us to operate from a place of compassion freely, without decision, simply because it's a spontaneous emanation of what we are. So he says, we do not want it. Well, why wouldn't we want it? Because to want something, you have to assume that you don't have it, right? So that's the first thing right there. It's not a product of desire because it's not something that you don't have. If you desire something you already have, well, that's cool. That's a great thing. But then the desire disappears because you have the thing. So it says that we do not want it, and that's what it means by that. That there's an understanding that this is our self that we're seeking. It's reminiscent of what Sri Nisargadatta says when he says, do you not realize that it is your search for happiness itself that prevents you from being happy? For the same reason, to search for happiness, you have to assume you don't have it. And so if you assume you don't have it, then you're going to look elsewhere for it. And we always look in the outside world for things. That's our bad habit. So when we do not want it, do not imagine it. So this is not something that's the result of philosophy. It's not the result of some castle of thought in your mind. You're not going to find it in thinking. You're not going to find it in running things through the mind. That's our problem, is that we've identified ourselves here with the changing mind all the time, not knowing that there's a silent, steady, ever secure, ever blissful, ever wise self that silently sits behind it, not reacting, not defining itself, not worried about anything like that at all, simply being. And in that being, it emanates its nature, Satchit Ananda. It emanates pure love, emanates pure wisdom, and experiences this existence. So we don't want something that's imagined, something that happens in here. We're waiting for something that spontaneously appears here when the mind silences. So we don't want it, meaning we don't assume that we don't have it. We're trying to realize something. And realizing means that you already have it. It's like when you search all over the house for your cell phone and then find out it's in your back pocket. You had it with you all the time. You just were not aware of it. And so this is what we're looking for. This divine nature of ours has been ours always, will be ours always, but we're not aware of it because we're busy looking through the house for the cell phone. So we don't want it. We do not imagine it because we know that it's not a product of mind or thought. We do not call for it because it is not separate from us. You call for things that have a separate sentience. And there is nothing with a separate sentience. There is only one sentience, and that is the divine, and it is manifested in all things. So it's not something we call for because we're not separate from it. It's not a thing outside of ourselves that we have to get to come over and pay attention to us. When the psychological past recorded in the mind completely vanishes, that's the one that my mind just jumps on, like, what are you talking about? All my memory's gone. And that just betrays how attached we are to this random set of memories. We have this wrong thinking that our mind actually records an accurate history. But anybody who's done even a little bit of experimentation or exploration in that regard knows that memories are rather arbitrary and certainly very rarely accurate. And especially the older they get, the more they change. Every time you retell an old memory, you change it just slightly, make the story just a little bit better in a harmless way. But after 20 or 30 or 40 years of that, you basically realize that the memories that you use to identify yourself are mostly just a made-up narrative that links some disparate activities or events together in your life that you hold on to as an idea of what you are. Swami Vivekananda says, your personality that you love so much is just a collection of limitations and restrictions. You're not free. You're beholden to this history. This history limits your choices in the moment. And so we're wanting to let go, to be detached from this psychological history so that we can be different than how we've acted before when we were basing our identity on material things, on experiences of the senses, and on random thoughts and memories in the mind. We're trying to withdraw from that so that we can find a place of silence within where we can know what we are when nothing is telling us. Not thoughts in the mind, not voices of our parents, not rules on the books in the government, not memories of events, not a collection of likes and dislikes, but that a natural self, a pre-existent self, before there was any doing, before there was any thinking. What are we? What does it mean to be a human being? This psychological death is essential, he says, because otherwise we just live our deluded life, up and down, happy, unhappy, wanting, not wanting, liking, disliking, just back and forth, between all of this dual throng that we live in. And this removal from mind, or removal of identity from mind, really. The mind can remain. We just don't identify with it. We just realize it's an organ that excretes thought and that there's nothing more to it. We don't need to pay any more attention to it than that. Let thoughts, knowledge, and attachments disappear, he says. So the psychological death, it includes your thoughts, right? And we know, of course, this is a rather esoteric thing, that everything is a thought. There are no objects. This chair right here, I have no idea. I have no way of proving that it exists outside of myself, because basically by the time I am experiencing it, I'm experiencing it in mind, because all of the tactile sensations that I assume are coming from the outside world, I really don't know their source. I don't know where they come from. Because they simply get encoded into information, say zeros and ones for the fun of it, like a computer, and that comes to your brain. And your brain has never seen the outside world, has never touched anything outside of the world. It doesn't know anything about anything outside of your head. It's locked in a black box called the cranium. And there's nothing in there. No, there's nothing in there. So everything that goes in there comes through the senses, which is just encoded information. And it creates a symbol for everything, which is the world that we live in. And so we come to understand that this world is thought. It's not actually a material thing outside of ourselves. The sages say it's very much like a dream. In your dream, you can mimic this perfectly and be just as convinced of its reality as you are in the waking state. So it's an interesting piece of information for thought, anyway, or for ruminating about the fact that we live in a world, in a mind, and not in a world. So we need thoughts and knowledge and attachments. Let them disappear. Why? Because they are built on the foundation of wrong thinking. And what is that wrong thinking? That I exist separate and apart from the whole. That I'm me, everybody else is there. I am me, God is up there. I am me, the universe is out there. That fundamental wrong thinking that I am separate and distinct from the whole is what disallows us from seeing the whole as it is and enjoying our nature of divine love, divine wisdom, and the beauty, the huge profundity of simply being. So let thoughts, knowledge, and attachments disappear. Attachments, that's our problem. Attachments means you've associated something with you. You know, you've used it to identify yourself or to say something about yourself or to fill some hole that you assume about yourself. So these attachments are just you identifying with things, creating a relationship between you and things that then determine your behaviors, determine your future thoughts, determine your perspective of the moment, since you're no longer able to see it objectively, to see it without any misinformation, as well as the knower, the entity who knows or experiences, right? Because our idea of a knower is that it's a particular, that it's a single point of perspective, when we in our true nature are infinite, immortal, ever free, ever pure, ever blissful. And we are not the smallness. We are not this one perspective. And you say, oh, that's impossible. But then again, just think of the dream. I bring it up all the time. But very important, because you can learn so much from a dream. You know, in that dream, you are, in fact, everything in that dream. It's all created out of you. It's all in your head. It's all in there, right? And you can, I mean, I remember once running through San Francisco in my dream and looking down and seeing one of those water spouts from someone's roof coming down, and I could see the little green moss growing around it, the individual little fibers, and I had an awareness of dreaming, you know, and I remembered it when I woke up and was like, wow, the detail. My mind in real time was creating a whole city that I was running through. What an amazing thing, right down to the little hairs of moss growing under water spouts. And so this knower in the dream is separate and apart from the whole, even though it's not, right? A dream, everything in the dream is equally you. It's all made of the same mind stuff. Even the you that you've chosen to identify with in the dream so the story can happen, even that you is just only as much you as everything else in that dream. But for some unknown reason, you've attached to that one point perspective and called everything else in your dream other. And so this is what the sages are telling us. This is what Ili is trying to tell us in this poem, In the Aliveness. So that's the third section for today. Give it a shot. Think about it. And let it inform your experience of being. You know, at this point, it's not something you can just do in the moment anyway. It takes a long time. That's because we're so far into it already. The younger you are, the better it will be for you if you have an earnest and sincere desire to know truth, to find out what the mystery of being is. Then you've got a whole life ahead of you, and you've got a very small amount of time behind you. So your sickness isn't chronic, perhaps. It might be something that can be more quickly healed if you're earnest and sincere. For the rest of us older curmudgeons that have been here 40, 50, 60, 70 years, you know, we make our efforts. We jump into it and grow and experience that divine bliss. Because spiritual life is about realization, about experience. It's not about a faith. It's not about believing something. It's not about thinking something. It's knowing. Knowing in a spontaneous, in the moment, constant way, not a referential knowledge of relative ideas stacked together in the shelves of your mind. This comes from the other direction, comes from inside you. So it's a very different way of learning, a very different way of knowing, and certainly a very different way of being, which is what makes it so seemingly difficult, even though the only thing we're trying to do is to know what we really are.